Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Negotiation. In this episode, we speak with Jia Wang, Interim Director at the China Institute, University of Alberta. In this episode, we talk about the focus of the China Institute, as well as how the Canada-China relationship has evolved since the 1950s, how China and Canada can recover from their strained relationship that has reached a low point since December 2018, and how the relationship between Canada and China may look 10 years from now. What lessons can Canada and other Western countries learn from China, especially when it comes to spurring on economic growth? We talk about the common misconceptions about China in the North America academic environment, as well as the key differences between the two academic environments of China and that of North America. Enjoy.
We may have to come to the understanding, and China is rising and China is here to stay. It is impossible to try to decouple from China and try to isolate China as if it were the 50s. So we do have to find a path forward, and we do have to have a strategy that is more forward-looking and to include China in the global discussion on how to tackle some of the pressing global issues, and also perhaps persuade China to work within global organizations to help solve some of the other global issues like poverty, global health crisis, and at the same time, hopefully the West and China could peacefully coexist.
Home to over 4 billion people, the Asia-Pacific region boasts one of the most powerful consumer markets on the planet. Not only is it home to half the world's under 30 population, but it's also home to more than half the world's internet users. It's a market no globally minded brand should ignore, but entering markets like China is no easy task. Just ask the likes of Microsoft, Google, Uber, and Facebook. Times are changing, and with the right partners, doors are slowly opening as more and more companies find success expanding into the markets of the Middle Kingdom. I myself spent 8 years in China, mostly as a venture capitalist, helping early-stage tech companies enter the Asia-Pacific market successfully. This show is dedicated to uncovering and examining successful China entry and growth strategies by interviewing the people behind those success stories. My name is Todd Embley, and welcome to The Negotiation, brought to you by WPIC Marketing and Technologies.
Jia, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you so much, Todd, for having me. It's my honor to be here.
So to start off, how about a quick introduction of yourself and the work that you do? What is the China Institute and why is it at the U of A? How long has it been functioning and what does it aim to accomplish?
Well, my name is Jia Wang. I'm the Interim Director of the China Institute. I'm currently kind of doing two jobs at the same time. So I'm the Interim Director, also the Deputy Director. So I pretty much manage the whole institute. Our institute is quite unique. It is the one and only in Canada that focus solely on China studies. And we do a lot of work that look at the diplomatic relations between China and Canada, and also the global influence of a rising China, especially in the economic sense, but also on security issues and political and even cultural and social dimensions. So our institute, although it's based at the University of Alberta, it doesn't just focus on Alberta issues with China. It looks at broader China studies. How it's really established in the first place is quite interesting. So the institute came into being in 2005. We're really fortunate to have a pair of visionaries, Mr. Sandy and Mrs. Cecile McTaggart. So the McTaggarts, they really, they were basically the reason why the China Institute is here with us today. In just before 2005, Mr. Sandy McTaggart, he was the chancellor at the university. He decided, along with his wife, to donate about 1,000 pieces of rare art pieces, paintings, textiles, and other artifacts from East Asia, mainly from China, to the University of Alberta museums. At the time, their collection is one of the finest private collection of East Asian arts. With this collection, Mr. Sandy McTaggart really hoped that the establishment of the China Institute would be able to, in his own words, to help Alberta and Canada rise to the occasion to better understand China, this rising global power.
And that's a lot of similarities with the aim of this podcast, is to really just kind of bridge that cultural divide and lack of understanding, just because the two worlds have been separated and are incredibly different. And I think it behooves everybody to start beginning to understand both equally and as well. So I'm very curious, after you explain all of that, and it's fascinating. Thank you so much. What is your background, and why did you end up wanting to take this role, and where does your work specifically focus?
I was born and raised in Beijing, although I'm the first generation Beijinger, as they call it. My parents are not from Beijing. My dad's from the ancient city of Suzhou, and my mom is from Qingdao in Shandong province, where a lot of people probably have tasted or tried Qingdao beer. So I was born and raised in Beijing, and growing up in Beijing, although it is now a very much international city, a city with people from all around the world lived and worked there. And when I was growing up, though, it wasn't quite like that. You still see an ocean of bicycles on the street, and crystal blue skies, and people in rather dull clothing, not the colorful ones people seems to enjoy now. But because my dad, he's a professor, and he also later became a researcher in international film studies, and he introduced me to the outside world, especially the Western English-speaking world. So at the time when most Chinese people cannot really watch foreign films, I got the chance to see quite a few foreign films on cassette tapes, VHS tapes. And I was quite fascinated about the outside world. So I had hoped to perhaps go overseas and study from an early age. So it just seems natural to me. So when I went to the university, Peking University in Beijing, I had a choice of either going to international relations or archaeology, because I'm quite interested in both. And I decided to study international relations, although I'm still fascinated by ancient history, especially ancient Chinese history. So after graduating, I decided to go study overseas, and I applied to universities in the States, but also Canada. And eventually I came to Canada and studied at the U of T. And that was my very first trip overseas. I never left China before that point. So it was just a fascinating experience for me. And later I fell in love with a Canadian, nice Canadian guy who happened to be from Edmonton. So we met in Toronto, and I traveled with him to Edmonton and started living here. And I also worked in a multicultural media TV station for a couple of years as a reporter, producer, and later joined the University of Alberta at the China Institute ever since. So I have been here for about 10 years. And I really enjoy working here. We have such a dynamic, but also multicultural team with team members from Canada, of course, but also China, many different parts of China, and also other team members from with a background in Europe, in the Middle East, in Africa. So it's a truly wonderful team, and I'm just feeling so privileged to be leading a lot of the projects, our activities, and also leading our team and to focus on Canada-China relations and also the study of China on the global stage.
So is that the focus then of the work, of your team's work, and really what the China Institute is about? Is that your focus?
It is indeed my focus and also the focus of my team. We try to do policy-related or policy-relevant studies that is applicable to the real world. As China gaining increasing importance on the global stage, both economically, but also on the international relations front, we want to help Canadians and maybe even beyond Canada. We want to help people in the Western world to better understand where China is coming from, what the country is doing, and also maybe hopefully to use that information to help policymakers and even the public to better understand China and also to better manage the relationship between Canada and China.
I'd like to ask you to talk a little bit about the Canada-China relationship historically. How has it evolved, or how did it evolve between the 1950s and then 2000, and then post 2000 to 2010? And I'm intentionally putting some interesting mile markers, in here, and then again 2010 to 2018. So if you don't mind me kind of breaking it up from the 50s to the 2000, then 2000 to 2010, and then maybe after 2000 up until say 2018 or so, if you don't mind.
Sure. Before the establishment of the bilateral diplomatic relations in the 70s, there was some interactions between China and Canada, but there wasn't a lot. So one notable event I would note is in the 50s, late 50s, really throughout the 60s, Canada had agreed to sell wheat to China. And at a time when China was really very much isolated from the rest of the world, especially the Western countries. And also during the 60s, late 50s to 60s, China had really encountered or faced with multiple natural but also man-made disasters that led to famines in China. So the wheat exports from Canada were just very important and in helping China get through the famine and get through the extreme difficulties in the 60s. And also one interesting fact is the Canadian Prime Minister who established the diplomatic relations with China, Mr. Right Honorable Pierre Trudeau. He first went to China in 1949, later returned in 1960. So he actually visited China twice, of course, before he became the prime minister. So he was pretty fascinated about China, and he traveled to China with a friend, and he later wrote a book about that experience, and it was fascinating. And maybe not surprisingly, later he became the first prime minister to officially visit China and also, of course, to open the diplomatic relationship with China. in 1970, in the year of 1970. So from 1970 onwards to perhaps 1990, the bilateral relations between China and Canada, it was kind of steady. There was exchanges of high-level visits. There was some expansion of trade. Before the 70s, really, the trade between the two countries is just wheat exports from Canada to China. But after that, trade expanded to other materials, other goods, mostly raw materials, until after 1990. From 1990 onwards, the bilateral economic relationship, especially trade volume, really grew exponentially. So, the two countries growing closer as it comes to economic ties, and then of course eventually China became Canada's second largest trading partner. In the year, I remember about in the 90s, early 90s, Prime Minister Jean Chrétien had led multiple, they call it Team Canada trade missions to China. And some of them are huge. Each mission could be consisted of over 500 people in business and also those senior government delegates. So that's quite an era where the two countries are growing closer in its relationship. One Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, came to power. There's a significant cooling period of this bilateral relations from about 2006 to late 2009. That the two countries' relationship haven't been very warm, and there are only very limited exchanges, and economic relationship is also at bit of a standstill. But from late 2009 in December, when Prime Minister Stephen Harper visited China for the first time, since he became Prime Minister, the relationship started to thaw. So there was a period of time where the two countries are growing a little bit closer together and trade continued to expand. So that lasted pretty much until things reaches freezing point again in late 2018 because of the Canadian arrest on behalf of the U.S. Of Huawei's CFO, Meng Wanzhou.
Everyone knows that December 2018, we hit a bit of a low point, right? And it's been a strained relationship, for the last 3 years or so. And without dwelling on that too much, we seem to actually be emerging from that strained relationship part and now starting to move forward a bit. Is there a way that the relationship could potentially have a reset, or that we can achieve a clean slate? And then if so, at this point, what needs to happen for that to take place, in your opinion?
Well, indeed, many observers would like to see this still important bilateral relationship kind of get a restart, or at least improve from one of the low points in history. So it does probably take some effort for that to happen. Some people would argue, after Meng is back in China and the two Michaels safely back home in Canada, maybe things would just magically go back to where it was. The truth is, it's probably not going to happen quite like that and just overnight. The the two countries were at a better place prior to 2018. There were even talk about a potential free trade agreement. But I think we have long departed from that point. Many of us in Canada and perhaps in China who are keen observers of this relationship probably want to see improvement in this relationship because there's no doubt China is an important country and it's important for Canada and for its economic future as well. So we don't want to see the two countries, really are stuck in this strain or a relationship that is quite fraught. We want to see at least the two countries can find ways to work together. So hopefully that will happen. I think it will take some effort on both parts, on both sides, the Canadian and the Chinese sides, to come together, maybe to at least restart some of the high-level dialogues and interactions. For example, there are dialogues set up for the two countries to have annually on climate issues, on law and order issues, and even higher, maybe premier prime minister level dialogue. If some of those high level exchanges can resume, I think that's a very good first step. We do need to know what China is thinking and hoping to do. And of course, China probably need to know what Canada is hoping to do for this relationship. Without a dialogue, we just cannot move forward. So I really hope to see more of these type of dialogues will resume. And also for the two countries to perhaps despite all the difficulties and differences, to find those common grounds, such as climate change, environmental conservation issues, and even potentially to seek opportunities to collaborate on global public health and managing of the global pandemic. So there are these areas where the two countries can work together and should work together. But we do need to see some efforts on both sides to at least showing the willingness to re-engage. But at the same time, of course, Canada is a middle power. So this very important relationship between China and the US, arguably one of the most important bilateral relationship on earth, that will have impact on how we engage with China and how we can move forward. So we do have to factor that in, as there's an African proverb, maybe describe the situation Canada is in is when two elephants fight, is the grass that get hurt. So we don't necessarily want to be in that position. And I think Canada would like to see the US and China can work together on some of the global issues and also keep their differences in check rather than evolve into some sort of conflicts. But that is a little bit beyond our control. But what is in our control, I think, is to find a path forward by re-engaging at a senior level and restart the dialogues.
I can't think of another country that is somewhat more at the mercy of that relationship. We are definitely the grass. We are so closely tied to China and so closely tied to the US. I can think of only maybe the UK relationship as being even remotely close to the types of relationship we have with there. Of course, economically, we are so reliant upon the US, but then also China, as well as are many countries around the world. So you're absolutely right. If I may ask, just quickly, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but 10 years from now, what do you foresee as the relationship between Canada and China?
Well, I wish I had a crystal ball. Unfortunately, I don't. What I'm hoping to see is a place where countries like Canada, China, and the US and the rest of the world can come together to really collaboratively working on things that is pressing, such as climate change, but at the same time could perhaps be a bit more tolerant of each other's differences. I think China will always have a very different set of values and maybe a governance style than Canada and the rest of the Western countries. And China is often feeling kind of anxious and that China can be misunderstood. Although that argument may not always be valid because there are certain areas and certain things probably China definitely needs to improve upon. But for the Western countries, I think we may have to come to the understanding, and China is rising and China is here to stay. It is impossible to try to decouple from China and try to isolate China as if it were the 50s. So we do have to find a path forward, and we do have to have a strategy that is more forward-looking and to include China in the global discussion on how to tackle some of the pressing global issues, and also perhaps to persuade China to work within global organizations to help solve some of the other global issues like poverty, global health crisis, and at the same time, hopefully the West and China could peacefully coexist.
I wanted to ask, and potentially recognizing that we're talking about completely different political and economic systems, and that I tend to find that the rest of the world kind of points and shouts at China to do certain things, improve your charity, improve your humanitarian, improve your environmental, do these kinds of things. You don't find China doing that to a lot of other countries in the world. And I think that potentially the rest of the world can be too busy pointing and shouting and asking for change from China instead of potentially picking up some of the things that they can learn from China and change themselves. So I'm wondering, what are some of the things that Canada and really some of the rest of the world, what can they learn from China? And specifically, what can they use to maybe spur their own economic growth over the next 20 years?
Well, as you mentioned, there are vast differences when it comes to China and the Western countries, values, governance, you name it. But I think what China is doing well, that may or may not be necessarily something that can be adapted by other countries, is China's ability to concentrate and stay focused and make those long-term plans. Once it sees certain priorities needs to be accomplished. During a pandemic, of course, this may not be the perfect example, but it's a time of crisis where China, of course, stumbled at the beginning of this managing the pandemic, but the country quickly come together, and people are, or at least most people, are pretty much buying into the government's measures, very strict measures, to try to contain the virus, and then maybe by comparison, China has managed to contain the virus maybe more effectively than some other countries. But I think there's still a bit of that trust in the government, maybe more of that in China. It probably has something to do with the Chinese history and how the country has been managed by a central government of some sort for more than 2,000 years. So people seems to have a bit more faith in the government and in the way government decide what's best for the country and what best for its people, and people would buy into it and then act upon it. And that type of maybe trust, hopefully, of course, the government is making the right decision, would help to really concentrate resources to tackle some of the tough issues like a pandemic and also the environmental problems and climate change issues. And that is something it's harder to achieve in Western countries. If anything, we learned from the past couple years and also from perhaps the US under Trump administration is there's a significant erosion of trust of people in their government. When people can't even put their support or even accept the legitimate result of a election, like in the US case, it is really problematic when the society is so divided, when everything becomes political. It is really difficult for the country to move forward and to focus on some of these big pressing issues that the country face and that the world face. So I think that is something maybe China is doing better. But I think because of our very different past, our history, and also political model, this might not be something easily achievable by the Western democracies. But hopefully there are some ways that Western societies can find some means to mend the differences and to have the society come together, at least when it comes to some major pressing issues. Hopefully that will point the country to the right direction.
You spend time in the North American academic environment, let's say, spend a lot of time studying the economic and political dimensions of modern day China. What do you think most people misunderstand about today's China?
A couple of things come to mind. Many people, when they don't know too much about China, the country, they tend to think it is a country that is highly homogeneous. People think the same, everybody's doing the same things, but actually there's a lot of differences exist in China, regional differences, even city and rural area divide. You probably will find a lot of commonalities between city dwellers in China, in Beijing or Shanghai, with their counterparts in New York or Toronto or Edmonton. So a lot of people don't recognize that China is not one ironclad where everybody's thinking the same and behaving the same. There's a lot of divergences and a lot of differences. So I think that's maybe one of the common misunderstandings among Westerners. Another thing I can think of is China's ambition sometimes can be misinterpreted. I still believe, and some other observers may also think so, is China's ambition is more economically focused, even it's maybe some seen as a military ambition, is still focused within sort of the neighborhood of China. And part of the rationale is to safeguard a safe environment, at least for China, to maintain its ability to grow economically. And China, of course, has been investing all around the world and has been doing business with so many countries. And China is the top trading partner for over 120 countries in the world. But you don't see China maybe talk as much about its political model, its governance model, or its values as much. Sometimes talk about China's economic growth model, and some other countries are interested in that type of growth model, but you don't see China on a global stage promoting, advocating other countries to adopt its governance model or really trying to become this dominant power beyond sort of economic prowess. So I think there's some misunderstanding where people think China is really going to rise and take over the world. Rise, yes, but perhaps not a global ambition to become the number one country other than economically. So I think there's maybe a bit of a misunderstanding. Another one I can think of is people, especially in the Western countries, tend to argue that China is not having enough innovation, and it's somehow stealing trade secrets and having IP issues. I think indeed there were some issues and some wrongdoings on China's part. But as we look back into the history, China was behind about half of pre-industrial innovations and technologies in the world. And the country is seeing it's going back to its past glory. But even when it comes to innovation, I think China is doing more, and the country is filing more patents in the world for the past 6 to 7 years. And there are innovations, and a lot of it coming from China. When we talk about technology exchange and trade and all that between China and the West, it's not a one-way street anymore. And it's often a two-way track where China is still learning from the West. But on the other hand, the West is probably learning and maybe or could be learning more from China, as China is leading on many of the newer technological fronts. So that's something maybe not everybody is paying attention to. I think China is still pretty eager to learn. And perhaps the West can also take a closer look at China and see what the West can learn from China and China's experience.
That's a good point. Now, you studied at Peking University, which, for those who do not know, it is one of the most prestigious and academically acclaimed and rigorous institutions of higher learning in China and potentially the whole world. And now you are teaching at an academic institution. You're not teaching, but you are working at and involved at an academic institution in Canada, the University of Alberta in Edmonton. Can you outline potentially a few of the key differences between just the academic environments in China and North America?
Sure. I think there are indeed differences. Although I have left the Chinese academic environment about 2 decades ago. So I think the academic environment in China has evolved from the time that I left. So just from my experience studying in China in Peking University, I noticed that it's still more of a sort of a lecture, and then you take notes, and then you do your exams type of learning and teaching experience, where the Western countries, Canada, for example, the university is offering that environment that you are more actively taking part in the learning process. And when you go to a class, the professors will normally give you something to think about, but he or she won't go through the textbook. And often they won't engage in a very long lecture. They would ask you to actively offer your take on the textbook or on the topic of the day, and then class participation, even group projects are key to that learning process, where in China, at least traditionally, is still more a classroom type of learning where the professors would do long lectures and then you take notes and their occasional participation, but that is not a key part of that teaching and learning style. So for many Chinese students who first came to North America, myself included, I found it's quite eye-opening to certainly to have to take a very active part in class discussions and to also learn from your peers. And in China, that's a very different style. That's I would say a key difference that I noticed. But of course, things are changing, things are evolving. I think more participation in China, in Chinese classrooms have become available. And also the experience of, at least in Canada, the experience of higher learning is also an experience that will expose our students to international learning and teaching environment, where many professors are from elsewhere, not Canadian, and students here, like at the U of A, about 10% of the student population are international. So you do get to have a lot of exposure to different ways of thinking from other parts of the world. In China, I think increasingly they are more international students, but overall, most campuses you won't see as many international faces on campus. So your learning experience is more limited with your peers within China. It could be many different parts of China, but it's mostly China. So there is that difference as well.
Jia Wang, Interim Director, China Institute, University of Alberta. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Growing a company is hard. Doing it in a foreign market? Exponentially so. The best piece of advice I can give you is not to do it alone. When you start looking across the pond for further expansion possibilities, and I sincerely hope that you do, make sure you choose the right partners to do it with. My good friends at WPIC Marketing and Technologies have almost 20 years of experience helping brands just like yours enter China. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Negotiation, and if you're interested in being a guest or want to connect with me or any of our team, please reach out to us at podcast@wpic.co. And be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. 再见。